supervised by Prof. Peter Scott and Dr. Chris Phillips. My research title is Modeling and Measuring the Concept of Market Orientation in the UK Higher Education Sector. The presentation will be divided into 4 parts, starting by research objectives, research questions, then research findings, and finally research timeline. Now, to start with the first part, which is the research objectives, as you see, there are 4 key objectives. The first one is to advance the theoretical foundation of the market orientation concept by relying on multiple constituency theory and value chain theory. The second objective is to examine the concept of market orientation from 3 perspectives: university marketing departments, academic departments, and alumni departments. The third objective is to develop psychometric sounds measure of market orientation on the basis of systematic procedures for skill development. And the last objective is to investigate the antecedents and consequences of market orientation. Now, before I move to the research questions, which is the second part, I just would like to say that in my upgrading report, I cited different streams of literature to show how the problem of my research had emerged. And based on that, I am arguing that there are 2 sides to the coin of market orientation. The first side is that different stakeholder groups have different needs, wants, expectations, and goals, which suggests that the market orientation concept needs to be modeled at constituency level, since it's problematic to conceptualize such concept by taking all the relevant stakeholders into account. Now, the second part, which is a complementary view, is that serving one stakeholder group would require different strategic business units within an organization to be involved to facilitate the creation of value to where that stakeholder group. Now, as different strategic business units perform different activities, that would also suggest that the concept of market orientation needs to be modeled at departmental level. Now, using this departmental constituency approach, I have defined market orientation as understanding which departments the relationship of certain stakeholder is primarily located with, and then navigating those departments to see how they could contribute in creating values to where the stakeholder, which in return leads to enhance their level of satisfaction and achieve the organizational goals. Now, the collective relationships between different departments and stakeholders could be seen as what constitutes a market-oriented organization. Now, for the purpose of my research, I've chosen 2 stakeholder groups, and I gave justification in my upgrading report why I've chosen them. The first one is a student, and the second one is alumni. Now, for students, I'm measuring the concept of market orientation from university marketing department perspective and from academic department perspective. Now, for alumni, since their primary relationship is located with alumni department, then I'm measuring the concept of market orientation for alumni mainly from alumni department. Now, having said that, I'll move to second part, which is the research questions, and as you see, my research focuses on 3 areas. The first one is on conceptualizing and measuring the construct, and basically I'm asking here about the components that define the concept of market orientation from these 3 different departments: university marketing departments, academic departments, and alumni departments, and how do higher education institutions perceive and practice each construct. Now, the second part deals with the antecedents of the concept, and I'm asking here about the factors that foster the adoption of market orientation and to what extent these factors foster the adoption of market orientation. Now, the last part focuses on the effect of adopting this approach on university success. So these are the key research questions. Now, using a discovery-oriented approach, which is based on supplementing the findings from literature review with the findings from the field work, I've generated this model, which is slightly different from the one I presented in December. And basically, I am testing here the direct and the indirect effect of 4 indigenous variables on separate department, and then testing this separate relationship on separate consequences. So open system, I'm arguing first, all these 4 factors have a direct effect on each one, and then I'm saying open system will influence strategic integration, and strategic integration will influence employee development, and will also influence quality-focused orientation, and that influence marketing department, and then student satisfaction, university performance, and the relationship between student satisfaction and university performance, and the same goes for the rest of the departments. Now, in the following slides, I will talk about the components that I have generated from the field work and from literature review that capture the construct from each perspective. Now, as you see, this is the first one for marketing department, and it is conceptualized as type 2 formative construct, which consists of reflective first order indicators, and these are market research, communication strategy, recruitment and admission practices, and interfunctional coordination. Now, for academic department, it's conceptualized as type 3 formative construct, which consists of reflective and formative first order, and these are teaching and learning methods, student-academic interaction, student engagement, academic support, interfunctional coordination, and finally, employer engagement. Now, for alumni, it is also conceptualized as type 3 formative construct, which consists of reflective and formative first order, and these are case for support, networking, resource commitment, programs activity development, interfunctional coordination, and finally information characteristics. Now, in the following slides, I will talk about the statistical procedures that I have used to validate each construct. Now, 2 things. First, the sector consists of 130 universities, and I managed to collect 64 questionnaires from marketing department, 71 questionnaires from alumni department, and 288 questionnaires from academic departments, and these 288 for 92 universities. Now, the following slides, because due to the time factor, I will explain the steps that I have used for marketing department, and the same applies for the 2 other constructs. Now, the first thing was reliability analysis. Any statements below 0.35 was deleted. Then factorial analysis, cross-loading items, any items loaded before 0.6 were also deleted. Then these results were taken to Amos 18 to perform confirmatory factorial analysis, and the cut point here is 0.90. Now, these findings were further taken to Smart PLS in order, which is partial leisure square, in order to establish discriminant validity and convergent validity. Now, for discriminant validity, there are 2 things. The first one is that the square root of the average variance extracted from each dimension should be higher than the values that are reported horizontally and vertically. Then the second issue is that each factor should load in its own dimension higher than the other dimension, as you see in this case. Now, as I said before, the 3 constructs are formative constructs. Now, for that, there is also need to do correlation, various inflation, and external validity, and all of them were significant at 0.001. For various inflation, the closer the one, the better it is, but the cut point is this number should be lower than 10, and for tolerance, more than 0.20 shows no evidence of multicollinearity. Now, then these results were further taken also to Smart PLS in order to establish second order construct, and the purpose of that is to establish convergent validity and to measure the relative contribution of each dimension for the construct. And to establish convergent validity, three things also need to be taken into account. The average variance extracted should be higher than 5.50, Cronbach alpha higher than 0.70, composite variability should be higher than 0.80, and as you see, market research has the highest contribution. Interfunctional coordination has the lowest contribution. For academic department, student engagement and academic support have the highest contribution, followed by employer engagement and teaching, and finally, student academic interaction and interfunctional coordination. Finally, for alumni department, information characteristics has the highest contribution, then networking, followed by program development, coordination, and finally resource commitment and case for support. Now, this table shows how higher education institutions perceive and practice each construct. Now, first I compared the sector based, because it's already segmented into 6 groups, so I calculated the mean score for each group. Now, the only thing you can see from this table is that these 2 groups have the highest mean score compared to the rest of the sector. And the other thing is that there's a bipolar position. And it becomes clearer when you go to the academic and when you go to alumni department. Now, to have a clearer pictures, I've done K-mean cluster to see how these universities orient themselves from these 3 different perspectives, and I've generated 6 groups. Now, the first group have the highest mean score and was like 5.4, 5.36, and 5.27. Now, my initial interpretation is that this group of universities, which is 21 universities, seem to compete on a global level, and they seem to benchmark themselves against world leagues rather than national leagues. Now, Group B, it is lower than Group A, but it's still relatively high from the 3 perspective, which suggests that this group is trying to associate themselves with the top end of market and also differentiate themselves from the lower end of the market by either capitalizing on student marketing activity or building academic reputation, or differentiating themselves by capitalizing on alumni marketing. Now, we have a Group C, which shows a very high level of marketing, of market orientation from marketing department, still high from academic, but low on alumni, and these are 10 universities. And basically these focus mainly on, seems to be focused mainly on student market rather than on alumni market. Now, we have a Group D, which shows a very high level of marketing, of market orientation from marketing, but lower from both academic and alumni, which suggests that maybe this group of universities use marketing aggressively to recruit students, but for the rest of the sector might be to enhance their reputation rather than to recruit students. And then we have a Group E, which I call them survivors, because they just about the mean score, and they are 6 universities, and the lowest level of market orientation, there were 3 universities. And then, how many minutes?
It was 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm testing the effect here of the 4 indigenous factors, and basically, okay. Now, let's talk about the direct effect first. The direct effect of open system wasn't significant at all. Now, for strategic integration, wasn't significant in alumni, wasn't significant in academic, and wasn't significant in marketing, but was very significant and high for alumni orientation. Now, if you look at employee development and quality orientation, were significant for the 3 perspectives, then the indirect effect is that it seems to be open orientation influence strategic integration, which is positive for the 3 perspectives, and strategic integration influences strictly both employee development and quality orientation, and that relationship goes by these two to the three perspectives. Now, there is interpretation also for strategic integration, why it is very high here, but due to the time factor, maybe we can later on, if anyone have a question, I'll be happy to answer it. Now, finally, this is the research timeline, is that the first year, last year, I was generating this model that I've been talking about. The beginning of this year, I've been validating the scales and piloting the questionnaire, and now I am at the third stage 3, which is findings, interpreting the results and findings. And thank you very much.
You must have missed something there. Somehow in that current year, you managed to get 288 questionnaires as well.
Yeah.
Didn't you mention that? So I'd like to welcome our colleague, George Christopoulos. Is that how, an approximation of how to say your surname?
Very well done, yeah.
George is based in Greenland and has joined the School of Marketing and Reputation. And he's kindly come over today to comment on a couple of the marketing-related presentations. And George is also running the PhD program now in that school. So over to you, George.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Well, I've got to say that I'm very impressed with what you've managed to do within 2 years. I haven't seen many PhD students who have completed the data collection, and they have even started analyzing the data. So that's quite impressive, and I've got to congratulate you for that. I think that you've had quite a lot to present within your presentation, so I just want you to clarify a few things for me.
Yeah.
The topic is very interesting, and I think that you won't have any problems publishing on this subject, because it will be of great interest, and the subject of market orientation has been around for a while, and it's one of the most important topics in the marketing literature. What I want you to explain to me is what was the gap in the literature that has made you research this particular area?
Yeah. Now, there are 2 or 3 things. The first thing is that in my upgrading report, I showed different perspectives of conceptualizing the construct. Some of these conceptualize it based on what it is in theory, and some of them conceptualize it based on what it is in practice, but there is no theory behind that. Now, the second issue is that the last work has been done in this was in 1998 by Lado and her colleagues, and therefore, since that time, no work has been done to offer an interpretation from theoretical and practical point of view about what market orientation really is, because some says market orientation is the implementation of the marketing concept, others says no, it is not, it's complementary to the marketing concept. Some says market orientation is customer orientation, some says it's organizational culture. So within the literature, it is not clear actually what market orientation is. Now the second issue is that recent publications and reports have been published, especially by European countries, about forcing, or not forcing, pushing the higher education sector to adopt business-like approaches. Now, I only identified 3 or 4 studies have been done using Nerval and Slater in the States to measure the concept of market orientation, and basically I am saying that drawing a framework from manufacturing to a specific service organization sector such as the higher education sector doesn't tell any insight about the sector and doesn't suit with the specificity associated with the nature of the sector.
So the conceptualization that you have put forward of student orientation for different departments, is that based on the literature, or have you
based on both? No, based on basically discovery-oriented approach says you have the literature, you start with the literature, but you are not driven by frameworks and you are not driven by any models. Now, when you look at the literature and they don't inform your research because there are different perspectives, no theory behind them, then you go to the field work see how the field work function, then come back to the literature, combine these both perspectives, then go into the field work, then come back to the literature until you generate a model.
So in terms of fieldwork, well, apart from the actual survey,
No, I've done interviews, like 17 interviews with marketing managers, 10 interviews with academic professors, and 8 interviews with alumni managers and people who work in my department from 7 different universities. And then I produce reports, give it them back, then comment on it, and so forth.
I see. And then in terms of developing your measures, did you follow any specific framework?
You mean the items that I used for my...
For developing the scales?
Yeah, items. Basically, I first consulted the literatures to identify certain items. I think for marketing, I only found 4 items that suit with the nature of first the sector, second the nature of the activities performed by marketing department. Then I went carefully through the interviews transcript by reading them word by word, line by line, to try to identify dimension from the interviews. Then I sent the questionnaire to different academicians in the States, Australia, the UK, and I think New Zealand. So they give me detailed comment, then I further enhanced the questionnaire, then I piloted, then last time I ran it, which was in January.
And did you split your sample? Did you have 2 samples? Because the literature talks about, you know, calibration and validation samples.
Hello. Can you say that again?
When we develop a new measure,
Yeah.
we need to have at least 2 samples. And one common approach followed is to split the sample into 2 and use one sample as the calibration in order to develop the scale, and the other one as validation to validate and to measure things like you know, discriminant validity to test for composite reliability.
Now, basically, first of all, my sample size is limited. I only have 130 universities. Now, I've done this rigor statistical analysis to overcome this issue, first by content validity from marketing people, from academicians across different countries. Then I used all the statistical techniques that have been suggested by Churchill in 1979 in terms of how to develop a scale. And specifically, I haven't come, to be honest, a paper which says that you have to split to...
Well, Churchill talks about it actually. But he talks about validation and calibration sample.
Yeah.
Because it's not quite right to use the same sample to develop a scale and then to test the psychometric properties of that scale using the very same sample.
Now, basically, if the questionnaire, the 3 questionnaires, weren't validated by different countries from different perspectives, then maybe that's true. But I think as long as there is a validation process and details feedback, details comment on these items, and also new items were generated from that validation process, then I think that to some extent will overcome the issue you mentioned.
One last question.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at your research questions, and the third one, it talks about the effect of university MOP on university success. How did you find success? The success is a multi-dimensional construct.
Is student satisfaction, university performance from literature, these secondary data, student employability, secondary data, and then alumni engagement and resource attraction based on scales from the literature. Now, some of these consequences were mentioned by the interviewees, and some of them mentioned in the literature. Now, basically, the 3 studies in the States only measure the effect of market orientation on university performance using 8 items. Now, I'm using secondary data and subjective measurements as well.
Thank you.
Okay. It's interesting, this question of scale development, because my PhD was in occupational psychology, and people were very, very concerned about the psychometric properties of scales, and it's always slightly bemused me in business that people are much more blasé about developing a scale and diving in with it. So I don't know about the market literature, but I would imagine that it will be possible to justify the fact that you couldn't split your sample. There are only 120 institutions in the UK, as you said, so but that is something that you will have to justify. But I personally, I think there's plenty of precedent to suggest that the scale development wasn't needed in this case. And as you said, all the other nations have done. But others might have a different view. Who else would like to make comments on Alan?
Yes, sir.
So it seems you had a lot of results
Yes,
compared to last year, and it seems that you got them by doing factor analysis based on the questionnaire.
Yeah.
Also looked as if the theory had been enhanced since last year. My question is, what's the relationship between them? The theory, when you do factor analysis, essentially no theory, you're just getting lots of variables and you're clustering some that seem to be significant.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of empirical backwards way.
Yeah.
But how does that then align to the theory? I mean, I'm not asking like Rajneesh what is the theory contribution, because it's
No.
clearly empirical.
Yeah.
Why, I guess I'm asking you to sort of defend factor analysis, which I know they use in marketing.
No, I will say to you, sir. Basically, factor analysis is just make sure that each factor loads on its own factors rather than, so if you are talking about market orientation, factor analysis